Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Thank you so much for joining the show today. I have a very special guest, a friend and a colleague of many talents. I think you will love her. I love her. Her work is phenomenal. I totally support every project that she does, and you'll find me often sharing a lot of her stuff on my social media account because I just believe in the words of wisdom that she provides and the wonderful work that she's doing. It's Miss Sharon Martin. She's a licensed clinical social worker. She has a private practice right up the road in Campbell, California, and she does a lot of writing. One of her blogs is very popular. It's on Psych Central. Is called Happily Imperfect blog. She writes a lot about codependency, toxic families, and things like that. So her work falls in line with mine a lot. She also writes for the Good Men Project and a slew of other sources. Her latest project is the book that she just released. It's called the CBT Workbook for Perfectionism. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. And as a matter of fact, I often do recommend it to many of my clients. And so I, thought it was only right to have Miss Sharon Martin on the show to talk about what else but codependency and toxic relationships. Sharon talks a lot about codependency today and how it's not necessarily always a negative thing like we are told that it is. And she talks about, just some other ways or some other perspectives that we can look at codependency and some of the behaviors that go into that. So she drops a lot of gems. So without further ado, here's Miss Sharon Martin. Hi, Sharon. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thanks, Natalie. It's my pleasure.
All right. So for my audience that's not familiar with you, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what drives the passion behind your work, rather?
Sure. Well, I'm Sharon Martin, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work as a psychotherapist in the San Jose, California area in private practice. And I've been doing this work in various forms for quite a few years now. And I think like most people, my work has sort of evolved over time and taken some different paths. And today we're going to really dive into talking some about codependency, which is one of the areas that I do a lot of work with in terms of my clients. And it's definitely something that I have struggled with myself. And I think for most of us, that's part of what the passion is I have, dealt with this and tried to understand it. And it's partly been my own quest to really understand myself that I think has really brought it to feel like, oh, this is really important for people. It's important, not just for me, but I think there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of confusion about what codependency really means. And I know that for me, it felt really bad initially, to feel like, oh, that's such a negative label. And so I hope with our conversation today that we can really help other people understand a little bit more about what codependency is. And I think really almost how that can be helpful for people in understanding themselves better and uncovering different ways that they can move forward and heal and, sort of get past some of the stuck points that they're feeling.
Sure. So, since you brought it up, please, without further ado, tell us what codependency is.
Well, and of course, I knew you would ask that because it's such a basic question, but I feel like the answer is actually fairly complicated.
Sure.
In some ways, I like to just define it in terms of it is a group of characteristics or learned behaviors that develop generally from childhood and often as a result of some kind of trauma or growing up in a chaotic and dysfunctional environment. Although I will say that's not always the case. We also know that codependency, like a lot of trauma, is also passed down through families. So it is also possible that people had a fairly functional family, at least in some regards, but their parents didn't really attune to their feelings. There wasn't really an understanding of the importance of feelings or expressing your feelings, and really the ability to sort of build people up, I would say, and help them feel good about themselves, almost sort of from a self-esteem and a self-compassion component. So that's a part of it. And, there's a lot of different traits that fall under, that label of codependency. And we can get into some of them. We probably won't have time to get into all of them because there's quite a few. And for different people, I think different ones sort of take the forefront. I think sort of the classic, pieces of codependency when we think of it are the people pleasing and the caretaking, a person who is just giving and giving and really like self-sacrificing and almost sort of the martyr role, which I think also sort of, gets you into sort of that victim mentality and really feeling like, that you're the victim.
Mhm.
And again, it's not to say that there aren't true victims. I don't mean to say that at all. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, people really are victimized and hurt and abused, and often that is, the root of the codependency. But I think we end up doing ourselves a disservice when we really get stuck in that as our identity. Like that's who I am. I'm the
Mhm.
victim of somebody else's alcoholism or somebody else's abuse.
Mhm.
Versus sort of thinking like that's something that has happened to me or is happening to me, but that's not who I am as a person, right? I mean, I think that sort of lends itself into a lot of shame and a lot of guilt, and those are those places where I think we get stuck and we don't know how to move beyond feeling like this is my fault, I'm the cause of this, I'm the problem,
Mhm.
what have I done wrong, to create this
Yeah.
situation.
So then you said that your practice has kind of evolved in that, you're where your patients are at, right? Their pain points or treatment of codependency.
Hmm.
What sort of problems are people coming in which are attributed to codependency?
Yeah, good question. So what I end up seeing is people really struggling around issues with boundaries is one aspect of it, which is feeling like there's sort of two sides to this coin, which is difficulty asserting yourself and asking for what you need in your relationships. Um, and sort of not knowing how or whether it's okay to say this is how I feel and this is what I need, which then creates a situation where your needs are not fulfilled in a relationship. So often people are in relationships, but they're not feeling like it's a very satisfying relationship. Either it might be truly an abusive relationship, or it may
Mhm.
be, more like what I was describing, sort of, you just sort of feel like, you've grown apart perhaps, or I don't feel like my partner really cares about me, understands about me, sees me, and hears me.
Mhm.
So there's sort of this disconnection there, and part of that is because you have been really stuffing down those feelings and burying those feelings and not knowing what to do with them. Both the positive and the negative feelings, if you will. So that's part of it, and the other part of the boundary coin is people who have such strong boundaries, right? They've really put up these walls to protect themselves, because they have been hurt in the past. And so they don't know how to sort of lower the boundaries enough to let people in, to create, trusting relationships and those fulfilling relationships, right? We also have to, I mean, there is definitely that element of trust where we have to let our guard down a little bit, and then a little bit more and a little bit more over time. Otherwise, we're isolated, we're alone. Um, and I think in all of these situations, the other thing that I often see is that people are resentful and they're angry, because they have been mistreated, they have been unfulfilled, they have not been able to, assert themselves and almost be themselves. And so over time, all of that giving but not receiving, it ends up leaving us not just, like I said, feeling unfulfilled, but also angry. Like, you don't care about me. I'm doing all this for you. You don't appreciate me. That again sort of goes back to, that feeling like, I'm the martyr. I'm just sacrificing me, my whole life. I'm giving and nobody really, cares and wants to give anything to me. Right. So then that anger starts to bubble up. And for people who are codependent, we do not feel comfortable with anger. We're not used to sort of anger being a healthy feeling or being a useful feeling. It often is very scary. For us, it's often associated with violence and aggression. And it's almost like anger is either it's 0 or it's 100. Like we don't really have a good sense of that in between area of how we can sort of use it in that positive way, to, move towards the assertive aspect of thing instead of just feeling it's out of control, and it's scary. So sometimes people also are struggling with those feelings of resentment and anger. And again, that leaves them feeling very guilty, like they shouldn't be feeling those feelings, that that's a bad feeling to have. And so part of the work is also helping people to, understand that anger is a perfectly normal feeling. It's actually can be very helpful in informing you that you're not, feeling mistreated or something is not, equitable in your relationships. And if we can, use that, like I said, in sort of some healthy, positive outlets, it can both just relieve so much stress and anxiety for people. But it also can be part of really creating relationships that are fulfilling and that feel good and where you're getting your needs met from your partner or, the other people in your life.
Fair enough. Where does that inability to express anger come from?
Well, it's again, it's sort of twofold, I think. Part of it is the lack of models, for sort of those healthy expressions of anger. So like I was saying, it's either growing up in a family where anger was really rage and it was scary, and dangerous potentially. So that gives you this idea that anger is not something that I should be feeling, and it's out of control and it's scary, like I said earlier. So there's that part of it, and there's also this learned experience that, as a child, that you're not allowed to be angry, that it's almost like really you weren't allowed to have any feelings. But anger being one of those really strong ones, that the child gets the message that you don't get to say anything, if you're unhappy about something. There's often only one person in the family that was allowed to be angry. Typically one of the parents, who was very angry and explosive. Although sometimes there might be a family where nobody's angry, but most of the time, eventually anger bubbles up. But like I said, there's really just sort of this stifling of feelings. It's like we don't talk about things, we don't feel anything, we just pretend that everything is okay in this family, even though nobody's talking about it. We all have some internal sense that something is really wrong, that this is not a healthy family. This is not the way that we should be relating to each other. And so from a very young age, children have that sense that something is off. but it doesn't match what people are saying and actually
Yeah.
doing in the family, right? And so it's often not until, children get a little bit older and they, go to school and they maybe visit friends' houses and they start to see how other families operate. And then it really becomes even more clear, although they probably still don't, completely understand what it is that's going on in their family. Um, but they start to see like, okay, yeah, something is off. My parents are telling me everything's fine, but mom's drinking all the time, or dad never gets off the couch, or my parents are always arguing, and the police are coming all the time. Like there's all this sort of chaos that doesn't match the like, yeah, the message, like everything's fine here, don't worry about it, just carry on and pretend there's nothing wrong. So anyway, I don't know, we sort of got off there on a tangent there, but from that sense, like I said, it's really this feeling of, just don't talk about
Yeah.
anything. And part of that is also, and don't have any feelings about anything as well. So the anger, being one of those feelings that you feel like you're just not allowed to have that feeling or express it to anybody.
And I'm wondering then, when do you notice, because it sounds like from what you're describing, that people stay caught up in this for years, for however long.
Yes.
When do they feel like it's a problem? When do they come in and see people like you and me? What do you notice is happening with them that they're starting to feel like, okay, either I can't take it or something's happening in which I can't manage this by myself anymore?
hmm Well, it is an excellent question, and I don't know if I have a great answer, because in some ways I think it can happen at different times for different people, and exactly what those circumstances are. And it can happen, for some people, they know immediately, they turn 18 and they're like, I'm out of this house. I'm cutting off my family. I know this is really toxic. I need to, figure this stuff out for me. And there are many, many people who it's not until their 40s or 50s or 60s even where they really start putting it together. Like, these patterns, these, struggles that I'm having in my adult life, I can now see that they go all the way back, to childhood. And, this is sort of the unfortunate legacy of, the family that I grew up with. And it's not as if, once you leave home, all of these things just disappear, right? Because like we were saying, I mean, it's so much of it is learned behavior. Um, and, when we're children, we're impressionable, of course. And, our brains are limited even, in their development to be able to understand and sort of cognitively, make sense of these types of things. So, it's almost, I think your question is almost a little bit like, what is rock bottom for somebody?
Yeah.
Right. It is different for different people. I mean, I see a lot of people, I think, kind of struggling around their romantic relationships. So it's often, again, exactly what point, it's a little bit different for different people, but they recognize that there's been a pattern of dating and romantic relationships that have either been abusive or unfulfilling, or they're dating people who are sort of what we call sort of emotionally unavailable. Like they just start to recognize, hey, this is a pattern. It's like the same, it's the same, personality in a different package that and it never seems to work out for me. And then the other thing that I have, that I see a lot, which I'm really actually very excited about, because it's such a great thing, I think, is seeing new parents, especially new mothers, or young, mothers with young children coming in and saying, like, I need to learn how to do things differently with my kids. Like, I don't want to make the same mistakes. I don't want to leave this legacy for my children. And I realize that I've been really affected by the way I was raised. And here I am, with these kids, and, looking for some support and some help in being able to, be more attuned to them, be less, stressed and frustrated, really help, their kids develop, self-esteem and feel good about themselves. So like I said, I find that really exciting and really hopeful for people really trying to break that pattern, that cycle of just repeating, because as we know, left unchecked, we tend to just repeat the same patterns over and over again, right? Until we, there's some kind of intervention either with a professional or on their own.
Very true.
Yeah.
And then, I'm curious because you said codependency is not always a bad thing.
Well, I mean, it creates struggles for us, right? I mean, it definitely, in their extreme, these traits cause problems for people. But what I think can be really helpful for people is when they sort of see the picture of, okay, I've got, there are some things that I am doing. There are some ways that I am thinking about myself and the world and other people that are getting in the way of me moving forward and being a healthy, happy, fulfilled person who feels good about his or herself. It almost allows you to shine this light on yourself. And again, it's not to say, there's something wrong with you, because I really don't feel that way. I think for some people, codependency can really feel like it's blaming the victim, and it's saying, you were part of the problem, or you caused this, or, you should have left that relationship. And it's really not about that. For me, it's more about once you can see, oh, hey, like this is, true for me, it then allows you to make the changes, right? It's almost like it's really just a, kind of a self-awareness of saying, hey, these experiences have affected me in some particular ways that are now causing some problems for me. It's not that you created this situation on your own. Again, if you go back and think about this developing in childhood, one of the things that I find really helpful is to remember that these, personality traits or characteristics or, behavioral patterns, whatever you really want to call it, doesn't matter here, but that these were things that you developed as a child as adaptive strategies to try to cope with and deal with a family that was chaotic and scary and unpredictable. Right. So you were, sort of in this traumatic experience, and you have very little to work with as a child. And so you do the best that you can. And so if you think about something like, people pleasing or caretaking, again, like these are not inherently negative qualities, even really like in the extreme, like I said, that they become problematic.
Right.
But again, thinking about your childhood, these are probably things that you did to try to, keep the peace in your family, to try to avoid conflict, to try to avoid getting hit, to try to protect your siblings. These were things that you did to try to make things better. I mean, you as a small, or child or even a teenager, like you can't solve these problems in your family. It's impossible. All you can do is try to cope the best that you can with what you have and what you can understand. And so I think framing in that way can really help people to see, like, this came out of your efforts to survive and thrive and, do the best that you could. And then it's often not until later on in our adult life at some point that we say, hey, yeah, these things that helped me in my childhood are no longer helping me. Now they're barriers. Now they're getting in the way. And I need to learn some different coping strategies and some different ways of relating to myself and to other people, so that I can really have what I want in life.
Very true. And, as you were talking, especially about the family piece and, people using this, it, basically codependency and all of those other elements that you described are survival mechanisms. So how does one go from surviving to thriving?
Well, I think if I was to really simplify it, I think about it as getting to know yourself, to really
Mm.
understand who you are, and then it's
Mhm.
being able to really be your authentic self, right? You have
Mhm.
to know who you are if you're gonna, be your most authentic self.
Mm.
And then finally being able to like truly love and care for yourself. Um, and I think like you need all three of those components,
Mhm.
as sort of, you can think about sort of recovery from codependency or recovery from abusive relationships, and truly, being a healthy, happy person. um, and I think again, this is sort of one of those confusing parts about codependency, is that we really tend to think about it in terms of relationships and the way it plays out in our
Mm.
relationships. And, and that is all true. But even when you're not in a relationship, although I guess you're always in some relationships, but, and again, codependency can happen in friendships between parents and children, but primarily we tend to think about it in those romantic relationships. So the point was just that even if you're not in a romantic relationship, your codependency doesn't just disappear, right? This is really, it's about you as a person and the way that you relate to other people.
Mhm.
Like I keep saying, also the way you relate to yourself, the way you feel about yourself is really this core piece of it too, is that, for codependents, they really just don't feel very good about themselves. They don't feel like they have value and they have worth. And that's why there's always this constant need for validation. It's, the seeking of other people to tell them you're okay, to tell you that you're lovable, the giving and the trying to please people so you can get that feedback that says, yeah, you're okay, you're a good person, you're,
Yeah.
important. You have something of value, right? So you're always having to prove yourself. But again, I digress a little bit here from your question, Natalie, um, which is, really that you have to understand yourself and be able to give yourself really that validation, like feel internally that you're a valuable person, you're a lovable person, without
Mm.
always needing somebody else to tell you that, right? Because like I said, then you're just sort of stuck in this cycle of always seeking that from other people. And
Mhm.
then as soon as you don't have it, then you're right back to feeling like, oh, you know what, I'm nothing. If I don't have a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a boss or somebody to tell me I'm great, then I don't have any value. I'm clearly the ugliest, stupidest, most unlovable person ever, right? That's kind of where we go back to.
Yeah.
And so the healing, the getting past it, has to be this internal part of feeling like I'm okay. I'm, a valuable person, a lovable person, regardless of what other people say. And accepting that there are going to be, people out there who don't like you, um, and have that be okay, and be able to tolerate that there's going to be conflict in relationships, and that's not always a
Mm.
bad thing.
Mm.
Right, again, that's sort of that fear of the anger and the
Mm.
conflict, and that it, fear that it's just going to become World War III or something like that, versus the idea that we can have a healthy disagreement, and that can actually be a path towards better understanding and problem
Mm.
solving and that kind of thing. But anyway, I really think we have to come back to ourselves as really the source of healing. um, that the path really is, I have to be able to feel good about myself, take good care of myself, be nice to myself, and just feel confident to be myself, regardless of how other people are going to react. um,
Okay. So how do we go from loving we to loving me?
Well, I mean, it's a slow process. I always tell people, it's not like, you're going to just go on a weekend retreat and, sort of discover who you are. And, I think that's sort of like one of those ideas that you're going to have this epiphany and the light bulb will go off and you'll suddenly be like, oh, yes, this is what I'm all about. It's a slow uncovering, but I think it has to be an intentional process that, again, if you have lived your life for so many years, really focused on other people, and being very in tune to other people's feelings and what they need and taking care of them, it's a big shift and it can feel very uncomfortable for you to now say, oh, well, what about me? Because again, the message that you have gotten for so many years is it's not about you. Thinking about yourself is selfish or it's wrong, and you shouldn't do that. Right? So there's a lot of those messages that we have to unwind in order, I think, to be able to do this. Also is recognizing that we got a lot of misinformation, that it's not wrong or selfish to take care of yourself or do things that are fun for you, pursue your own goals or your interests, that those things are not really, they're healthy for you, but that, I think you being your best self and being fulfilled is also going to be good for the people that you're in relationships with too. Right? There really is sort of this, overflow effect that the more you do for yourself, the happier, healthier person you're going to be with your children or with your spouse, with your friends. Yeah. So anyway, it is a process for sure. But I think if you just slowly, even just start to ask yourself the questions, what do I like to do? And for a lot of codependent people, the answer is I have no idea. I don't know who I am anymore. I haven't done anything for myself in a long time. So
But
some
I get
of it
that
is,
a lot.
yeah, it's like you gotta almost think of it like there's some experimenting you have to do. Like, let me try some things and see if I like them. Sometimes it's thinking back, well, what did I like to do when I was younger? Sometimes you might still like some of those things, sometimes not, but, but it is often sort of tapping into that, what do I believe in? What, has meaning for me? What feels purposeful? Where's, what do I have some energy or some passion around? And like I said, almost, for some people, it really is thinking back to what are those parts of myself that I let go of? What were those dreams and those hopes and those goals that I once had that I let them go by the wayside. Maybe I want to bring some of those back in, or like I said, maybe there's new things because obviously we change and, life changes and so forth. But, I think some of it is just giving yourself permission to say, I matter too. And I'm worth spending some time and some energy on or some money on. And it's not that it has to be all one or the other. It doesn't have to be all taking care of other people and focusing on other people and doing everything that they want to do or all about me, right? There's a lot of middle ground. And that's really, I think, where healthy relationships lie is, I take care of myself. I be true to myself. I, do things that are of interest to me, but I also, take into consideration and, do things for other people. It's not that I have to just choose one end of the spectrum or the other. And again, I think that can be a really helpful reminder for people is that it's not all or nothing on these kinds of things, right? It's not like we're saying just forget about everybody and don't care about other people's feelings, because that doesn't feel right either.
Sure.
We want some balance. We want some give and take. We want to think about others and to think about ourselves.
I agree. What are some signs that a person can pay attention to while they're in a relationship? What are some clear indicators that, somebody out there listening may think, okay, I don't know that I'm codependent or not. What are some signs that they can look for that says, one, that they're having some problems with self-love, and two, that yes, you are codependent?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one is, like I mentioned earlier, is that if you notice that you need other people to make you feel good about yourself, that's definitely a red flag. Is that if you have a hard time being not in a relationship, or being alone, um, or you feel like you're constantly looking for other people to validate you, that's a key part of it. Um, and then I think, in addition to that, I mean, it's also really looking at those patterns over time.
Mm.
Um, because I mean, if you're a codependent person, it's not going to be just something that you're experiencing in the one, a particular relationship that you're in right now.
Mhm.
It's looking back and saying, hey, does this seem familiar? Has this, come up for me before?
Mhm.
Um, and again, I think it really requires, some time and some
Mhm.
intention in really paying attention to your feelings, which again is not something that comes natural to people that are codependent. Like, there's really
Mhm.
often a disconnection between yourself and your own feelings. But this is something that you can absolutely learn just by practicing it, just by spending a few minutes once a day, a couple of times a day, of
Mhm.
starting to ask yourself the question of, how do I feel? And
Mhm.
again, at first you may find the answer is, I don't know. But the more that you practice, and even using a list of different feeling words can be helpful for people to start identifying what those
Mhm.
feelings are, because those feelings are going to tell you, is this relationship fulfilling for me? Do I feel
Mhm.
good in this relationship? Or, am I feeling taken advantage of? Am I feeling unappreciated? Am I feeling unheard? Right? Because those are the cues that something is off in your relationship.
Mhm.
Um, and again, I mean, I think you can ask yourself the same questions regardless of your relationship status too. And start really just trying to pay attention to what feelings are coming up for you, because once you sort of tap into that, I mean, it's like, that is the wealth of information that I think, you sort of been missing. Is it's going to tell you whether you're on the right path or not. Those feelings, whether you're, moving in directions and doing things
Mhm.
that are, good for you, really.
Awesome. Do you think that someone can ever be free of codependency?
Well, sure. I really think about, these codependent traits really as a spectrum. To me, it's not so much, checking off the boxes and feeling like, oh, I've got 10 of these traits and, that means I'm codependent. But really sort of looking at them, individually, is like, how much of a problem is this for me, this particular issue, this particular behavior or way of thinking. And so, um again, it's not so much that, like, healing is eliminating all of this completely, but it's kind of moving it back into a
Mhm.
place where it feels like, it's not creating issues, and it's not, so difficult, for us. So again, if you just think about something, like people pleasing, it doesn't have to be like, oh, you're a people pleaser or you're not a people pleaser. It's really like, okay, maybe I can do less of that. Once I am feeling, more confident and better about myself, I have more self esteem. I realize I don't need so much of other people's approval. I don't need to, do so many things to make other people happy at my own expense, because that's what
Mhm.
where the problem is in the people pleasing. Is so I often think it's just really sort of like, can we dial it back a little bit?
Right.
So it doesn't have to feel like, I have to completely, give myself a whole, personality, makeover or something, and I have to not do any of these things ever again. But
Yeah.
absolutely, I mean, to answer your question, it is. we're, people are capable of change. And that's, really what it comes down to, is that we can learn other ways of thinking and behaving and interacting with other people. Absolutely. So, I mean, that is, how the healing comes.
In a relationship in which we find ourselves completely codependent, wanting the validation, and there's a toxicity cycle. I have a lot of people that come in and say, you know what? I still want to be connected with this person in some capacity.
Mm-hmm.
But something in me has got to change, and we can't keep doing this dance anymore. What do you say to something like that for people that are extremely codependent and they still have to navigate in that relationship with a family member, or partner, or whatever the case may be? What do you say to something?
Well, I always, think you have to remember that you have choices. And I think people often, they kind of get this narrow thinking where they don't see all the choices because, doing something different, either just feels very foreign to them. They almost really don't see it as an option, that there are different ways to have this relationship or to see this person. So I think if you can recognize that it doesn't have to be exactly the way it is right now. But I think the other part of it is that as you change yourself, relationships change, right? I mean, there's this dynamic quality to them, so that if I start, interacting with you differently, it's going to change the dynamic that we have relationally. And even if I just start, feeling differently about myself, it also means I am now going to interact differently with you. So I don't know if this answers your question exactly, but I think for me, I end up kind of thinking about, we have the power to control and change ourselves, right? We can't change other people. We can't, sort of quote unquote, change the relationship, from the outside, but we can do it from the inside, in the sense that, the more sort of work I do for myself to better myself and become a healthier person, means I am going to have, the relationships with the exact same person, it's going to look a little bit differently. Maybe I'm going to say things differently to you. Maybe I'm going to choose to spend less time with you. Maybe I'm going to walk away, or speak up for myself when you say something hurtful. So it starts to change the way that the relationship operates. And that doesn't mean it necessarily immediately improves. Sometimes it can actually get worse before it, gets better, or just before it changes, right? Because as you start to do things differently, there can be some resistance from people who don't want things to change, especially if they have been in that power position. I don't know. Does that make sense and kind of answer your question? Like, I like for people to feel like that they're empowered, like you're not just, you know, um, at the mercy of what other people do.
That's a good point, because I do think that when you're in a relationship like that, people do start to feel that way. Like, I'm at the mercy of the other person. Like, I can't function without this other person, or without their validation, or without something from that person.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes too much for them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's because you're so used to it. It really is a huge change to shift things, even in a small way. It can be very scary to, after 20, 30 years, to say, hey, that's not okay for you to talk to me that way, or to say, if you keep talking to me like that, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go home, or I'm going to hang up the phone, or whatever the case may be. Right. I mean, that's you don't know what's going to happen, or you may have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen.
Yeah,
But I mean,
absolutely.
again, to my point of it, it's, you have choices. You may not, love all of the choices that you have, But you do have choices. And I think that's an important part of getting out of that feeling of just being, I'm stuck, I'm the victim, there's nothing I can do about this, is
Yeah.
that, you can shift things. Um, and, even I think people sometimes feel like they have to continue to have relationships with, certain family members when
You don't.
that you don't. I mean, that is a choice. I mean, again, I mean, to make that choice, you're really fighting against, family expectations and, history and, so many things.
Mm-hmm.
But there are almost always choices. And I think for some people, you really just need to be able to explore what all the choices are,
Mm-hmm.
um, and sort of open up, like I said, open up your vision on some of those and say, yeah, actually, there are different things that I can do here. Um, yeah,
Fair enough.
they may not all be perfect choices, right? Or the answer to all of your problems, but, in different ways that they can make a difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so for people who are looking at taking a step back, I know you mentioned self-love. What are some other ways in which they can help themselves while they're experiencing a codependent relationship?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think for people to really start, just doing things for themselves, like some fun stuff, understanding, what am I interested in, what kind of gets, my energy moving in a positive direction. There's lots of, sort of self-help books and
Mhm.
articles, and I mean there's lots and lots of information about codependency, which is a good thing too.
Yeah.
And I think some of that can be helpful for people, and just to understand better and apply it to themselves and really
Mhm.
understand what it looks like for them.
Mhm.
um, but as I mentioned earlier, I really think it comes down to being able to care about yourself. That's sort of self-love. um, but that other part is you have to feel like you know who you are. I mean, I feel like that always has to be excuse me, the first step is like, I can't tell you to love yourself if you're like, well, I don't know who I am. I can't sort of love
Exactly.
something I don't know.
Exactly.
um so I feel like that's that's part of, maybe before the self-love is the, like, I have to have self-understanding.
Good.
um
Good. What are some of the books and resources that you recommend? Do you have some favorites?
Well, Codependent No More is, the classic book, and it really, it's been around for, I don't know, many, many years at this point, by Melody Beattie. And I mean, she's really um, the most well-known expert. There are many others as well, but that, I mean, it really is a great book. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've read it. I just, I continue to just go back to it and read sections and just go, yeah, it's like right on. So I definitely recommend that, especially for, well, really for anybody. I was going to say, especially if you're really sort of new to the topic. But um, well, and then, to give myself a little plug,
Mhm.
I do a lot of writing about codependency
Yeah.
as well. As you know, I write a blog on psychcentral.com. So every week, I write something new. And, sometimes it's very specific to codependency. Sometimes it's a little bit broader, but it's often, very much the same sort of themes that we've been talking about. So there's new stuff there, and there's several years worth of material on there
Mhm.
as well that people can tap into.
Mhm.
Yeah, so and there are some other podcasts as well that tap into specifically some codependency, but
Yeah.
just like yours, there's lots of great stuff out there too that's
Yeah.
really just both just, I think, self-esteem and self-worth and self-compassion. In the book, Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff is another excellent
Yes.
for people to start to understand what that really means and how to
Mm.
put that into action. That's one I like as well. Yeah, and then again, pretty classic stuff at this point, but a lot of Brene Brown's books.
Mm-hmm.
The Gifts of Imperfection's a great one, as are all of her books. But I think
Sure.
that's a good read, also in terms of just accepting yourself as you are, right? And
Very true. Very true.
that part of it is trying to get away from feeling like I need to be perfect or I need to be a particular way to be lovable or acceptable. Yeah, so
Do you also recommend Codependence Anonymous?
yes, absolutely. For some people, it's a really good match. I know not everybody, it's a 12-step model group.
Yeah.
And, so not everybody, wants to do a 12-step model for various reasons, and that's fine. But for those that do, Codependence Anonymous, and, there's also Al-Anon, and there's another one that I was going to say. And there's also Adult Children of Alcoholics, all 12-step model
Okay.
groups. There may be even others. Like, there's a lot of them. But those groups are fantastic because they're generally readily available. Those groups are a little bit less, there are fewer of them than there are of like AA and NA. But, they also have online meetings and literature, material, books, and things that you can buy through the Codependence Anonymous organization.
Okay.
And they're free, and they can have such great support for people, especially if you're feeling really alone in this and you feel like other people, like, you don't want to talk to your friends about it, or you feel like other people don't understand. I think there's really nothing like that peer support that you can get from those meetings of people who are in it with you. So that
Definitely.
can be a really powerful and healing experience for people. So yes, thank you for mentioning that.
Sure. And then what about you? Where can people find you and connect with you if they want to reach out to you?
Well, my website is livewellwithsharonmartin.com.
Mhm.
So from there, yeah, you can find lots of my writing and
Mhm.
newsletter and various other things that I have created and so forth. So yeah,
Yeah,
I'd love for people to stop by there and get some more information as well.
beautiful site. Yeah, it's a beautiful site. Also, Sharon, do you have any books or things like that, or any projects that people can support you with?
Yeah, so I have a couple of things. Well, I have two on my website. People will see there are two ebooks that I have there. One is a workbook on setting boundaries.
Mhm.
And then there is one that is navigating the codependency maze, is what it's called. And so
Yeah.
that kind of, again, it's both of them have a lot of practical questions, reflective
Mhm.
questions, exercises for people to, try to make some specific changes for themselves. And then I don't know when this episode will actually go live, Natalie, so I don't know how the timing will work out, but starting in the middle of November, I'm going to do a short online class for people. It's really focused on helping people navigate the holidays and kind of get through the stress,
Oh,
particularly of dealing with difficult family members, is going to be one of the big
sure.
focuses. So that's going to be a 4-week class there from the middle of November to the middle of December. So
Yeah, definitely try to get
yeah.
it out before then. And then where can they find information on your class?
So that on the website, Live Well with Sharon Martin, and then on Facebook, if people want to find me there, Sharon Martin, LCSW.
Okay,
I'll have lots of stuff on there as well. So
awesome. Good
that'll
stuff.
be great. Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. I purchased both of your books, so
Oh, thank
I
you.
know they're great. So awesome. Good stuff. Thank you so much for being on the show, Sharon.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I hope that you enjoyed the episode with Sharon Martin. Please let me know what your thoughts are. A date with darkness at gmail.com. If you have any listener questions, please also email those to a date with darkness at gmail.com. And if you're also looking for support, come on over to a Date with Darkness Facebook group. It's new, flourishing, and thriving with people that are recovering from their toxic and unhealthy relationships and looking to support and to be supported from someone just like you. And I'd appreciate if you come on over and introduce yourself and tell us how we can support you. Put any questions in the post box. They'll let us know what you're looking for support on, and we'll be glad to help. And please be sure to like, love, share, and rate the podcast for future listeners. And sharing is always caring. So if you know of someone who might need it, please do share that. Also, if you know of anyone who might be the perfect guest, invite them to contact me and apply. On my website, they can go to adatewithdarkness.com and apply to be a guest on the show, either as an expert or someone who wants to share their personal journey with narcissistic abuse. People always love confessionals. Those are so very touching, and people learn a lot from others' experiences. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and I hope that you join me next time on A Date with Darkness. Looking forward to coming out of the darkness with you. Be well.